What I'm going to do in the next 40 minutes, that shows you my maths is wrong, 50 minutes, is to talk about what I think is the 21st century agenda, which is not so much to do with quality of care, it's more to do about quality of life, and it's the role that you can play in delivering that quality of life. Care homes today, well, they sort of get a very bad press. But what we have to accept is that they are needed and will continue to be needed, despite all of the protests that care homes are archaic and it should be supporting people in their own homes and then giving them supported independent living arrangements. But we know all that is value, even though once you go prematurely into a care home, there will be an increasing need for care homes as we look forward for the next 40 to 50 years. And the reason for that is really addressed on this slide that you can see. At the moment, there are approximately 430,000 people who are living in care homes. And a report that came out earlier this year, an excellent report, you can get your hands on it, it's not heavy reading, easy to download, from the Alzheimer's Society, I think it came out in February, now says that around 80% of people who are living in care homes have some degree of dementia. The figures that we had been using were sort of ranging between the low 60s to the mid 70s. They've now refreshed it by looking at data, and they now say approximately 80% of people have memory impairments, many of whom will be living with dementia. Now what that means is that we're talking about 325,000 people with dementia living in care homes. That is 40% of all people with dementia. Now what is happening is the profile of those people is changing. I think what we can see is that those people are becoming increasingly dependent, many of them having complex, challenging needs, and many of them at the end of their lives as well. Which doesn't mean to say it's a great challenge to engage people in activity if they seemingly are beyond engagement because of the severity of their dementia. That's something I'll move on to later. Now, it's that third bullet point, the one about complexity of the needs of people with dementia, that signifies that we'll need care homes in greater numbers. As most of you probably know, there's going to be a double, or actually more than double, of people with dementia in all high-income countries, so that includes the United Kingdom, over the next 40 years. Some of you might have picked up in the press over the past few weeks that there is some research now suggesting that the incidence of dementia is tapering off. In other words, we're not going to see these new cases in the numbers that we anticipated. And that's possibly to do with the fact that people are heeding healthcare advice, looking after their bodies better, especially blood pressure and heart disease, and as a consequence we're seeing fewer people with vascular dementia. But that doesn't mean to say that there will be less people with dementia. There will be fewer newer cases, but there will not be less people with dementia alive at any one time. And the reason for that is partly your fault. Because oh no, it is the fault of every person who wants to enable a person with dementia to live well. The England's National Dementia Strategy was launched in February of 2009. It's entitled Living Well with Dementia. There are 9 national dementia strategies across the world. And if they haven't got Living Well with Dementia in their title, embedded very soon in the opening paragraphs is that phrase, Living Well with Dementia. So the argument then is, so what does living well with dementia mean? Well, it means that your needs are being met. And what are the most fundamental human needs? Well, they are the needs to be safe, to have health care, to have personal care. So if you meet the needs of people in this fundamental way, meeting their personal care needs, their health care needs in the safe settings, living well with dementia means living long with dementia. And that's what's going to be happening. What we're seeing is more and more people now with advanced dementia who would have died years before when the services to them were poorer. So there's that challenge again, how do you engage in activity people with advanced dementia? But that was the reason why we're going to see a reduction in the numbers. There won't be as many new cases, but the other people with diagnosis of dementia will be surviving extraordinary long periods of time. So we have a profile of high dependency in the care homes. This report that I mentioned from Alzheimer's Society in February is entitled Low Expectations. And what those low expectations are all about hinges on this slide. when they spoke to family members and asked them what they thought about the care their loved one received in the care home, close to 70% said the care was good. When they then asked them, what about the person's quality of life, that dropped back to around 40%. So we seem to be delivering the care better than before, but we're seemingly not giving people a reason still to be alive. I mean, I see so many care plans on a weekly basis, and I read them. And if it's bad in care homes, that is nothing to compare how bad they are in domiciliary care, because there's something that seems to me to have gone very wrong indeed. You read these care plans, and these care plans seemingly are all about the stuff that we do to get out of the way so we can get on with our lives. Somehow it has become this person's entire life. Because the care plan is all about washing and dressing and bathing and going to the toilet and not a lot else. And so I go to a care home and I see somebody who's sitting in a lounge and this man is washed and dressed and is clean shaven, so I know all the ticks are going in the boxes, the care plan is being met. I look at him and I think, you might as well be sitting there, unwashed, unshaved, and in your pyjamas, because life is going to be exactly the same. Nobody said, once you're washed, dressed, and ready for the day, you will have a day that's worth living. See, there's no point getting a person ready for the day if their day doesn't begin. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem to begin for just so many people. And that's what this slide is all about. The care is good, better than ever before, but can we truly say we're giving people a quality of life? Well, what is exceedingly depressing is this 2013 report from the Alzheimer's Society. It builds on their report from 2007. The report in 2007 was entitled Home from Home, and it's in that report is this finding that set the tone that you can't live well in a care home. Because what the researchers found is that in every 6 hours, excluding personal care tasks, a person only had 2 minutes of engagement with a member of staff. That may be a formal activity, it could just be a conversation. So in other words, what it's arguing is that probably in a day, a person only gets about 5 minutes of meaningful human activity, conversation, occupation. And that was 2007. We're now 6 years on, and we know that the population of residents has changed. It's even more dependent now, so the probability is, I suspect they'll be coming up with a finding that will suggest it's worse than what it was in 2007. So again, we get confirmation as to why families are saying, I'm not happy with the quality of life that my loved one's getting. What we have to be clear in our own minds, there is a clear distinction between quality of care and quality of life. It's not one and the same thing. If we think it is one and the same thing, we have set the bar far, far too low. So what we need to do is to refresh our thinking and say it cannot just be about a person's care. But unfortunately, for whatever the reasons might be, we still see home managers believing that low expectations are good enough, and they believe that people who live in the buildings and their families should share the similar low expectations. Well, I think we need to challenge that. I think we need to give people reasons still to be alive. And it doesn't matter that we're working with people who live with dementia. I mean, I still come across people working in care homes who give me the impression, and sometimes they articulate it, that there is no point. There's very little point engaging people with advanced dementia activities because, well, they don't remember. You know, what is a person with dementia is not going to go to bed at night reflecting on what a wonderful day it's been. Nor will they lie in bed anticipating it's going to be an even better day tomorrow. Their intellectual powers rob them of that capacity. But that doesn't matter, because I think the maxim that we have to work with is that we work in the here and now. And what we have to say to ourselves is this: if you can make somebody with dementia smile, it doesn't matter if 5 minutes later they cannot remember that they have ever smiled. Because in no way does that diminish the happiness that you felt at the very moment you were engaging with an activity. That's the therapeutic ground that we work on, the here and now. It doesn't matter that this person is not going to remember. The therapeutic territory that we occupy is the present. And that present may be in a very short period of time. It may literally be measured only in seconds. There have been many, many occasions when I know that I have engaged well with the person with dementia, and I know that as I walk through the door, all I've done is cross the floor of a room, and as I walk through the door, every fine word I have spoken has already been forgotten. And by the time I reach the exit of the building, to that person with dementia, I have never existed. But in no way did that diminish the happiness they felt as I engaged them in that conversation. So it doesn't matter that they can't remember. We work in the here and now. So, where's this take? Now, when I left the National Health Service in 2009, lots and lots of people thought I must have done something quite reprehensible. I was escaping to somewhere because I wanted to work in care homes. Who wants to do that? And because care homes have this negative image. But for me, a mission that I believe I will share with every single one of you is that there is only one reason why somebody should come to live in a care home. Now, I'm not going to ask you what is that one reason, but maybe you just want to be thinking silently to yourself. I wonder what a reason is. Why would anybody come to live in a care home? I didn't catch it. Right. Well, that would be a negative, wouldn't it? And that's the challenge. I mean, there is so much guilt around. It's one of the reasons why we get so few family members engaging in the lives and times of care homes, because they themselves are racked with guilt because of what has happened. The positive construct can be summed up in these words. It's to get a better life. If your life is not improved by going into a care home, then it was the wrong decision. And that doesn't simply apply to care homes. It applies to everything and anything to do with people's care. Whether we're talking about drugs for infections or depression, whether it be daycare, home care, surgery, any form of therapy, day centres, or coming into a care home, if your life is not better for those interventions, then the intervention is the wrong one. So that is the matter. Now, to say it's a better life isn't to compare it to an ideal that was being lived decades previously. We're not talking about a better life compared to a life of 50 years previously. The average age of a care home resident is 83. So we're not talking about a life that was being lived 50 years previously. When the person's in their early 30s, probably with a partner, children, friends, neighbours, energy, good health, and life was good. We're talking about the reality of what life is like for most people before they come to live in a care home. 80% are living with dementia. When you look at the profile of people who are living in their own homes with dementia, half of them are living alone. Most of those are widowed women with dementia. Why are they living alone? Well, it's for two reasons. One, women outlive men. The range is approximately 3 years in the UK at the moment. But it's also primarily to do also with something that I am quite puzzled by. Unfortunately, I've got to dash off when I finish this, otherwise I would have lingered, because there are just so many of you that could hopefully answer the question. What I'm always curious about is why women have this peculiar attraction to older men. We do. 74% of women marry a man who is older than themselves. The range is huge. 2 to 8 years from first marriage. So typically, a woman is 2 to 8 years younger than her husband. Second and third marriages, you just see the stretch. So when I tell you that my wife is 14 years younger than I am, you just work out now what number marriage I'm in. So you see, if you fuse the two together, women outliving men and women marrying older men, typically a woman spends the last 9 years of her life living alone as a widow. So when we start to see the great risk of dementia surfacing in the late 70s and the 80s, and most men are dead by 80, the risks of dementia really start to accelerate as you pass the 80th birthday. You can see that most people with dementia are women. Significant numbers of those are living lonely, isolated lives. So it's not a good life. And if they're supported in the community by services, well, you obviously saw the press yesterday and the day before at the numbers of people who just get the wretched 15-minute home care visits. A home care visit is gone in 15 minutes and the person just sits there, alone, underoccupied, until the next brief visit with families and neighbours who may be quite disengaged. This research that we did not so very long ago showed that only about 30% of people wish to engage with a person with dementia, even if it's a member of your own family. Because we don't know what to expect. They don't know what to say. They're intimidated. They're frightened. And so, when we say a better life, it's not to be compared with the life of 50 years. Previously, it's compared to the lonely existences that so many people are living at this very moment. So in some sense, that to achieve that better life, that bar is low. And there's the problem. Just give them some care, and we think we're doing a really good job. No, even though the bar is low, in order to give them a better life, we need to raise that bar. So that's, for me, that's the only reason that people come in to a care home, is to get a better life. Now, what will that mean? Well, firstly, it's not a negative decision. It's a positive decision. What we have to say to ourselves is that in the care homes, there are practitioners, yourselves, nurses, care workers, who are experts, working with the most vulnerable people in the community. People who I've already said, others are avoiding because they don't know how to engage and they're intimidated by the presence of somebody who's aging and demented. So here we have experts who can take over responsibility when professional services in the community can't cope and families, as you said, can no longer cope. They're burnt out, frustrated, exhausted, but here come the experts. What I like to think about care home is, I'm absolutely useless. I'm actually quite reluctant to go home tonight. Actually, I'm not going home tonight. No, it's tomorrow. And I'll be even more reluctant to go to Tory because I hung a picture last night. You've been hanging, I had to hang around it, that was the problem, I wasn't hanging anywhere. And so I hung a picture last night. I just was not confident that it's actually still hanging when I get back. You see, I'm useless. And that crosses the whole spectrum of DIY and panics in the past. And so if I break down, or as has happened of late, run out of petrol, it's not my fault, alright? Garages are always closed when you come up to me. And you phone the RAC or the A and you just stand there and they say that in 45 minutes and you're just there, aren't you? And then you see that blue light flashing. And you think, oh, thank God for that, because here comes the person to help me. That's a care home. Here are the people who can now help you at the very point that you believed you could no longer go on. So that's how I see it. It's a positive decision. And that positive decision isn't just to provide a health and personal care solution delivered within a care safe setting. That is setting the bar too low. I think it's critical that what we can say, that starts to raise that bar, is that we can give people a peace of mind that all is well. I truly believe that family relationships can be improved once a person comes into a care home. We've got the challenge of overcoming that sense of guilt that I placed mum or dad in a care home. I was talking to a caring husband a few months back, and he said to me that he let his wife go, because she was now living in a care home. And he said to her that he would never do it. But then he said to me, whilst I said to her that I would care for her to the bitter end, I didn't know how bitter that end would be. And he just couldn't keep on going. And so you can actually start to resurrect relationships by saying, look, we're now here to care, we'll do all that coding stuff, you can visit, do whatever you want, which might just be sitting, talking, you can be here for 10 minutes, you can be here for 10 hours during the day, it just does not matter. And I really do believe that we encourage and enable families to visit, maybe they will see that their relationship with their parent or partner is improving. But critically, I think the solution is what I call the 11 hours. In essence, as you go through life, you need less and less sleep. I mean, that's how it goes. So basically, a baby in the first 12 months of life needs approximately 18 hours sleep in a 24-hour cycle. And then it starts to diminish and diminish and diminish. As you get to the teenage years when you never get out of bed, that's the sort of blip. But then once you get into adult life, truly, the average is just under 8 hours. So a working adult needs just under 8 hours sleep. But once you start to get into your later years, late 70s, 80s and older, that drops back to about 6 hours sleep. That is all a person needs to be refreshed. So if a person in a care home is taken, goes to bed, give them an hour to drift off to sleep, 6 hours sleep, An hour to wake out of their slumbers, that's 8 hours. 8 hours in bed. The typical care home resident needs 5 hours of personal care in a day. It could be unpredictable timings, it might need more than one member of staff, but when it comes to the washing, the bathing, the dressing, helping people with meals, with their drinks, taking them to the toilet, etc., it takes up 5 hours. 8 plus 5 is 13, 13 plus 24 is 11. What's going on in those 11 hours? That's where care steals much. Because that's our opportunity. Because we know what's going on in the lives of people who are living in their own homes prior to coming to a care home. Those are the hours of boredom. Those are the hours of under-occupation. And so, what are we going to do in those 11 hours? So it gives meaning to being alive. The old agenda was he didn't really care. It was just about the quality of the care. In other words, the 5 hours. What we're now saying is the new agenda is the quality of life. We have 11 hours to play with. And what are we going to do in those 11 hours? What are you going to do? That's the question. You see, I've heard for a long, long time, and not just me, that we should see equal status given to those who are in charge of giving people quality of life, as we see to those who are giving people quality of care, whether that be just social care or clinical care. If you go to countries like the United States, New Zealand, Australia, they're far more in tune with this. There will be somebody who has responsibility for the quality of life that is delivered in that home. It will be about activities, engagement, occupation, in the building, external building, and they have an equal voice with the senior nurse who's there to do the health, the medications, etc. They work in partnership. That's not what we see in this country. We see so often in too many places the activities being marginalised, fitted in as and when necessary. We've got to transform that, either by activity workers doing more, or coaching and mentoring and sharing their skills with nurses and care workers so that they can start to see the value of engaging people to live that quality of life. So, what can we do? Now, I think what has happened over recent years, there's been an increasing commitment to personalisation. So activities have to be relevant to the people that we are engaged with. The history of reminiscence, now very much badged as life story work, goes right the way back into the early 1960s. It's quite fascinating that if you look at the standard psychiatric textbook for students, medical students, that was published in 1958, it actually states in there, do not talk to old people about their past. Just don't do it. That's a huge no. Why? Well, if you do, you'll introduce despair. Because what they will do is compare the bleakness of the present with the richness of their past. It then goes on to say, if the person themselves persists with their wish to talk about the past, that is a defense mechanism known as flight from reality, because they cannot bear the past, to bear the present, they'd rather flee into the past. It then says, despite your efforts to stop that from happening, if the person who is aged continues to wish to talk about the past, you then have evidence of senile psychosis, because that person is only able to hold on to historical memories. That's what was written in 1958, until an American psychiatrist called Butler in 1963 said absolutely ridiculous. All people, young or old, like to reminisce. They like to think about their past. It makes you feel good. If it wasn't good, it enables you to learn lessons. You can express your individuality. And obviously, if you talk to people about your past, the probability is those people weren't there when you were living your past. So you can just lie through your teeth. You can inflate your own importance to make you feel good about yourself. Butler wrote in 1963, The Value of Reminiscence. Within 4 years, you've got a whole reminiscence movement started. It was generic to just pastime activities, very much focused on the lives and times and age of people when they were younger, always highly personal. And it was just sort of trickling along until we get a life story movement, which I think really is come into play because of technology. Because you can download so much. You can hand out DVDs that are rich in information, and so as a consequence, it really has energized reminiscence, nostalgia, pastime, life story, whatever it might be. The danger is you just sit people in front of DVDs and just play the newsreels in the 50s or the 60s. It never was all about pleasure and leisure. Although it is 12:15 and I'll soon have to run home to give my wife her early morning call. You don't believe me, do you? She has eyes in bed, so she's waiting for me to get the peeled grapes and drop them into my mouth and then she gets up. She'd kill me for that and for the picture falling off the wall, obviously. We need to know about people in terms of how they live their lives. What actually gave them meaning. I think I need to learn more lessons. Because is that what women do? Is it all about housework and shopping? Maybe it's not pleasure or leisure. I mean, there are other things. I know there's the clubbing and you get spray tan and I know all that. I'm talking about what you mean during the day. I mean, because that's what we're going to do. There are numerous examples, nice little stories of people folding, washing. It just feels comfortable, it feels good because that's what they used to do. I was in New Zealand and they have created in one of the care homes I don't know what it's called, it's not really a nursery, but it's full of things that you would have had when children were babies, and it's got the dog therapy in there, and it's not for everybody. I would have thought that approximately 10% of the women in their care home, that was the space they occupied during the day. They were clearly enacting the role of being a mother again, and it fulfilled them, but only 10%. That does mean 90% of women did not engage with it at all. I mean, that's the whole personalisation. You can't enforce somebody on something because it may not be there. So, do we give people opportunity to have lifestyles that are meaningful? It's not all about the pleasure and the leisure. It's also about stimulating interiors, and this can dovetail neatly into life story work. In Google, where I work, we have rummage boxes, which are what they say, the boxes you rummage through, and they're themed. They're themed all from the 1950s. Now, why the 1950s? Well, what we know about dementia is that it's historical memories that are preserved best. It's recent memories that go first. What we say is what you learned last, you use first, what you learned first stays the longest. But when we talk about memories that are sustained, it's really emotional memories. I mean, as I'm talking, feel free to reminisce. Reminisce about your own lives. Just turn the clock back 10, 20, 30 years. And the probability is those memories that you're now resurrecting are there because they have emotional undertone. If there's no emotion, it's just stuff. And so you don't bother remembering. So it's about emotional memories. And what we know about emotional memory is that it's between 15 and 30 that the most profound emotional memories are laid down. Now, why that is not surprising. Because that's a huge transformational 15 years. You're on a journey from being an independent child to an independent adult. You're leaving school for work, college, university. You start entering relationships outside the family, boyfriends, fiancés, then partners. Partners lead on to homes that become yours, like the parental home, children. And so you can start to see, we're talking about work, relationship, homes, housing, how that just emotionally resonates with people. So emotional memories laid down to age of 15 and 30 are the ones that stay the longest. Average age of a resident is 83. So basically you just go back 60 years. If you go back 60 years, it takes you to the 1950s. So that's what we start to talk about. The 1950s means something to people who are aged, especially those who are living with dementia. So the rummage boxes that we have a theme from the 1950s. Sport, school, foods, and it's just items that you can just engage people with. The treasure chests are the personalised ones. The personalised rummage boxes with the treasure chests, they're in people's rooms, and they are their own mementos. Probably ones that are treasured, which is why it's good to have a key to lock them away while having them on display. It's one of the great challenges in care homes, as you want to transform the room into the person's home. Unfortunately, with the levels of dementia, you'll have many people who will be walking around, entering people's rooms and removing their treasured possessions. So it's a balance to achieve. So a way of accommodating that is to have the treasure chest. And so you sit down with somebody, open the box, it's full of knickknacks, mementos, photographs, and there's the engagement that's meaningful and highly personalised and hinges on the life story of that individual. More generically, destination features. Wonderful work going on now, creating destination points and features. I've recently come from Chester. Many of these destination features are stripped out linen cupboards. I mean, some of them are rooms that you transform so that in a pub or a cafe, but lots can be done with cupboards. Most home managers will always say we haven't enough space. What they need to do is audit what's in the cupboards, and then have an audit, get the skip, and just get rid of all the stuff that's not been touched, literally for years, and suddenly you find the empty shelf space, and then strip the cupboard bare, take the doors off, probably take the shelves out, and create a feature. So what we just did in Chester is to create a bookies. It's very close to the Chester racecourse, and so what we've got is a flat screen television, we have horse racing on the loop, there are sports newspapers there, betting slips, and what you've got are a couple of guys who hang around at the bookies. Alternatively, they're hanging around outside the linen cupboard. And why do I stand around outside the linen cupboard? You see, what's often said is that as we theme the corridors with destination features, that it's the moments spent between rooms are as important as the moments spent within rooms. People spend a lot of time walking around for absolutely no reason at all. If you can create destination features that resonate with the lives of the people who are living in the buildings, they won't remember that there is a bookies to pass by. Or we have kitchens that have been designed, sculleries from the past, indoor gardens. They'll discover them. But what you're saying is you're bringing pleasure as they're walking around the home, and as a consequence, even though they'll forget having to wear in a few minutes, we've brought moments of pleasure to these people's lives by creative designs in the buildings. But we do need to be very careful. The last bullet point there is all about stimulating wall coverings for people to touch. And we can theme them. So they can, for example, one I saw recently was of traditional occupations and you can touch the clothes. But what we often see are these puzzle boards, interactive features going up. They've got like bolts and hinges and things you pull and press. And I had the opportunity 2-3 years ago to have a care home as a template to put all the designs in that I thought could work for people with dementia. And in that home we've got 2 destination points. Because it's in Yorkshire, there's a textile mill, which is basically cotton and yarn and knitting and patterns, and as a result, women are taking away the needles, the yarn and the cloth, the cotton and the wool, and start putting it back at the end of the day. We've also got a newsagent there, and the newsagent is a counter with newspapers, magazines, sweets, and as a consequence that all disappears during the day. So they actually have these destination points. And I also put these puzzle boards down the side. The touchy-feely things, the cloth, the materials, the bolts, etc. And after a few months, I could see that the destination points were really being used, because they were sort of mucky or messy, a bit, the fingerprints all over them, and that's how it should be. Because why would it remain pristine if people were engaging with it? Except the puzzle boards were pristine. The only people who were pulling the handles and pulling back the bolts and rubbing the materials were the staff. The residents never engaged. So I was thinking, well, what is this about? Now, I thought, first of all, it's a problem of peripheral vision. As you age, peripheral vision becomes very poor indeed. So if you're walking down the corridor, you actually don't see what is on the walls. So I thought maybe that was it. Then I had these sort of penny-dropping moments. A light bulb, if not a penny. Everything about the destination point was nostalgic, to resonate with the lives of people. How many of you have got bolts, locks on your walls that you play with as you walk around your own houses? You don't. So why would a person with dementia relate to bolts and hinges and fuzzy-feely things on the wall? It would be completely alien to them, which is why they don't touch them. So it's all these nice ideas But actually in practice, it doesn't work at all. So I've never now themed a corridor by putting these interesting, fuzzy, feely things to do. Meaningful moments. A colleague in the dementia care community, a guy called David Shear, talks about those butterfly moments. They're one and the same thing. When you talk to many home managers about activities, they often say, well, my staff haven't got enough time. Old-fashioned thinking. Because what they're thinking is a 30-minute session or a 60-minute session. Why? If a person with dementia can only remember for 60 seconds, why not just give them 60 seconds? If you give them an hour, by the time it gets to the last minute, they've already forgotten the previous 59. So what a waste that was. So it's what we call meaningful moments. Meaningful moments are brief emotional encounters. They're brief emotional encounters predicated on the knowledge of the person, who you can do, as you can with the theme of corridors, nostalgic conversations. This is the standardized things you can get when we put in the treasure chests. Sorry, not the rummage boxes. That you can sit with them and show it and share. Or they work better if it's personalized. So what we'll say is, just go to somebody's room, come out with something, an ornament, a photograph, sit down with them, and just for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, just talk to them about whatever it is. And for most people, they're beyond conversation. But you see the recognition in their eyes and the smile. You've given them 60 seconds of positive emotional experience, meaningful human contact. Now it's only 60 seconds. So I'm looking at this table right in front of me now. There are 9 women on the table. I'm a busy worker within the care home. I've got now no more in 10, 15 minutes. So what I can do is engage with you. I can come to you and sit with you, and for 60 seconds, I can talk to you about something that's personally meaningful to you. You get the smiles, the emotions, hopefully some laughter, definite interest. I've done the 60 seconds. I get up from you and I go to you. I sit down with you and I do the same again. And then you and you go all the way around, and then I leave. But before I leave the room, I look back. And when I look back, what I see are 9 contented women who have no idea why they feel contented. Because to them, I don't exist. Because they've already forgotten everything I did for them. Now, how do you know about that? It's because we have known for a long time the flip side. The flip side takes me to you. And you. She's not looking at me because she's writing. Yeah, you. That's it. Good. Right. Here we have 2 women in a day centre. And I don't know why it is you don't like her, but you don't. And so for reasons that we don't understand, you just shouted at her and hit her. So you're now the victim. We rush over and we'll measure your heart rate, your pulse rate, and what's known as the galvanic skin response, which is the sweatiness of your skin. All about arousal and agitation. As you might expect, heart pounding, pulse racing, clammy skin. Now, coming to your rescue is your failing memory. 120 seconds after having been hit, you have never been hit, because you can't remember. But we're going to continue measuring your heart rate, your pulse rate, and your galvanic skin response, and what does it still show us? It's still racing, pounding, and clamming. In other words, the emotional reaction to an unpleasant experience persists for longer than your memory of the unpleasant experience. Flip it round. That means the emotional reaction to a pleasant experience persists for longer than your memory of the pleasant experience. So I just devoted 15 minutes to 9 people, and I've given you contented lives. And that maybe another 15 minutes is going to come your way 2 hours from now. So what we did, we carried out some research. We carried out some research in a care home in Winchester. Meaningful moments. And what it showed us was, there wasn't a lot of benefit that we could detect on the measures we were using for the first 6 meaningful moments. So over a period of a couple of hours, we gave you 6 meaningful moments. So roughly 5 minutes. And we couldn't detect anything. But as we then gave you a 7th, then your mood did start to elevate. So by the end of the day, when you received 14 meaningful moments, so probably less than 15 minutes, your emotional well-being score was twice as high as it was when we started. So it does seem that the emotional trace is laid down that improves your welfare as the day progresses. So that's what we mean by meaningful moments. You just drop into people's lives, and that literally can be passing through in the corridor. It doesn't have to be sitting down. It can be quite spontaneous, or it can be quite planned. And I put onto the final bullet point on the slide those key words, because it's my own personal memory job. I'm fortunate that in my job I go all over the world. And I was in New Zealand, and I was there on a Saturday morning, and New Zealanders are really competitive, and they're really into their sport. You know, women as much as men, netballers are really high profile in New Zealand. And what I came across was this team event that the home manager had broken the care staff into teams. And what that meant was a team would step forward and they would have to present a resident, but they mustn't name the resident. There was nothing pertaining to the resident in terms of their appearance, definitely not their name. They would only describe what the resident liked and did. And it was for the other teams to guess the name of the resident. And basically all the teams would present about 3 residents each, and then obviously we had a winning team. Now you know what the home manager was doing. She was drilling into those teams individual knowledge of each of the residents, which means anybody working in that building could engage in a meaningful moment any resident they happened to be passing by, because they were learning all the time about each and every resident. They ran these team events twice a week, sometime on a Tuesday and on every Saturday morning. It was just a way of saying, you can all do it. You can all engage with somebody in a highly personal way if we give you the opportunity to learn about the residents who are living in this building. And so, meaningful moments are a very neat way of infusing what we do with the life story of each individual. But I've only got about a couple of minutes left, so this is my last slide. And the reason why I was on the last slide when I do this presentation that's on this theme is that I really want to get people to think out of the box. And when I was coming down the train this morning, I had actually 5 stories in here, and I was thinking, right, which one am I going to tell? And I thought, I'm going to talk about Sylvie. It's about stretching our concept of life story, activity, to beyond the obvious. Now, Sylvia was in a care home, and she was a nightmare. She was a nightmare because of the risks that she ran. She was known as a wanderer, but she was a wanderer with great risk because she would fall. What Sylvia did, it was like a compulsion. You'd sit down, and literally, within minutes of having sat her in the lounge, she'd be out of the chair, and off she would walk. And having decided to walk, you virtually knew what the outcome was going to be. She would fall. Because she was covered in bruises. Now, I think the staff team were very tolerant. They didn't really mind the fact she was getting up and moving around. But the issue was the falls. That's what they needed to stop. But also they needed to stop something else, because she upset other people. Because she was like a woman on a mission. She wasn't just getting out of a chair, walking them forward. She was getting out of a chair and walking towards someone. And it was random. She would pick different people at different times, there was no consistency at all. She'd go up to this person and say, I'm so sorry. Walk up and fall. That's what she would do. And this has gone on for weeks and weeks. So what was going to be done? Well, the GP came in and prescribed antipsychotics. Well, as you might expect, as so often happens, it just sedates her to such a point, she's now sitting in a chair, slumped, not communicating, unable to meet any of her needs. And so as a result, they would take it off, so we're back to square one again. And so, here's the story. She gets up, she walks, but it's a mission. She has to go up to Sylvia and say, I'm so sorry. The backstory, well, Sylvia was a mother of 9 children. She lived in Belfast. And her youngest child was born when she thought she could no longer have children. So she was around her 40th birthday, and Kieran arrived. And all of her children say that Kieran was the apple of her eye. Probably because he was completely unexpected. He was about 6 years after the youngest one. And so she doted on him. And so through Kieran's life, Brothers and sisters all say, well, yeah, he was spoiled, we were envious, but that was Kieran, and he knew that his mother adored him and replayed to that. And so he's a teenager, and he's pampered and spoiled still, and he's 17 years of age, and he's in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he's murdered. He's shot in the troubles. Sylvia is distraught, but only distraught for about 48 hours. By the time of the funeral, people were worried about her, because she had absolutely no emotion at all. She was comforting and consoling everybody else. Yet even though she'd lost her son, the one that seemingly meant most to her than anyone, she was devoid of emotion. After the funeral, from everybody else's perspective, it went from bad to worse. Because basically she closed down Kieran's life. Everything was taken out of the way. The photographs of Kieran, his mementos, he was very much into sport, were taken down, boxed, and put into the cellar. She closed his room down. Everything was boxed and put into the cellar. She said for safekeeping. But it was more than that. Because she could not talk about Kieran. His brothers and sisters, they wanted to talk about it, aunts, uncles, and she would always try to close the conversation down, and if she failed, she would walk out of the room. She was trying to cope. The family said that Mum never grieved. She was, in her own way, grieving. But she was introducing the psychological defense of repression. If feelings are so red raw to the point of being intolerable, the mind comes to the rescue and tries to repress. And it's very difficult to repress your true feelings if you have reminders all around you. So that's why everything was put away for safekeeping, why she would not engage in conversations. And then, roughly for the next 40 years, she survived. Everybody said there was a blunting to Sylvie. She'd lost that sparkle that she'd had. I mean, she was still a good mom, she became a doting grandmother, but there was something missing in her life. And now she's demented. She's in a care home. What you learn last, you lose first. What you learn first stays the longest. As I already said, not literally first, but the emotional memories. She goes back in time. Recent memories are destroyed. She's heading back. And where's that going to take her? It's going to take her to the very point where Kieran is alive and killed. She couldn't cope when she was able and compos mentis, but equally she could no longer cope when she was now living with dementia. Now what she did, because this was my interpretation, what she did was not to invoke the defense mechanism of repression, she invoked the defense mechanism of projection. In other words, if you have a worry you can't cope with, project it onto somebody else. And that's what she was doing. When she got out of the chair, the reason why she was on a mission is that she was going to say, I'm so sorry to somebody else. That's what she was doing. She projected all her feelings onto that other person. And that's why she was driven to get out of the chair. So, there's no logic in dementia. You can have people who search for their young children who will still recognise the fact that they're in their 80s. There's no logic. So I had an idea. Kieran was so much to him. I wondered if we could sort of leap his death, go beyond his death into his younger years, and engage her in that life story activity with him. And what was then beneficial was what she did when he was 17. Because when she came into care, her house was sold. And they discovered, her sisters discovered, in the cellar, the boxes that had not been touched for over 35 years. And her sister, even though she knew that Sylvie would never again touch these boxes, nor what was contained within them, she couldn't bear to throw them away. So she stored them in her attic. So when I said, look, she's so wrapped up in Kieran, we're going to try and leap his death. What came into the care room were these boxes. And for a period of weeks, the staff worked on these mementos. They created picture books. They set out the mementos that we were told meant most to Sylvie because they meant most to Kieran. And we sat down with her, and when she started to look agitated, somebody would go over and would start to open up the scrapbook. He used to play darts and snooker and football. There are photographs of him. He used to write poetry, or poems he'd written. He used to sketch. There was a horse's head that he sketched. I remember sitting with her one day and saying, "What's that?" And she just said, just horse. And I knew when she said that it wasn't just anything. Because you could see by her face how meaningful that meant to her. And the one thing she treasured over everything else was this scarf. It was the scarf that Kieran used to wear around his waist, like every Bay City roller fan. And she would caress this scarf. And we eventually realised he didn't have to sit with her. She would just gaze and touch and caress the scarf. And never again did she get out of the chair. Or you can sedate her. Or you can give her hip protectors. Or you can think out of the box and realise that therapeutically you can work with people's life stories and actually truly engage them in meaningful activities that resonate with who they are, to give them pleasure, but also in that instance to really solve the distress of a woman who was suffering as much now as she had previously done 40 years previously. Thank you.